Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you, Yasi, and thank you everyone who's able to attend today's meeting. I appreciate being invited to present and give a little bit of a perspective from the Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina's perspective, talking about ways that the company has evolved over the last couple of years in particular, and then with a specific focus on the need to adapt based on the COVID-19 crisis that has impacted all of us.
Can I ask everyone to mute themselves if you're not talking? Sorry, Nate.
That's okay. There. Okay, the echo is gone.
Okay.
My name is Nate Timon. For those of you who have not met me before, I live in North Carolina, and I am the director of the People Strategic Advisory Team at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. So that means I'm in the HR department at Blue Cross. I lead the team of strategic advisors, which many other companies refer to as HR business partners or HR consultants. And then I've also got strategic workforce planning responsibility across the enterprise as well. And I'll touch on that a little bit as we go through the presentation. I'd also ask anyone if you've got, I do have a section that my very last slide is for questions formally, but I'm happy to try to address any questions you may have along the way as well. So just feel free to interrupt me if the spirit moves you in such a way. So here's the agenda that I'd like to cover from a high level topical area. So a bit on who is Blue Cross North Carolina, a bit about our mission to transform healthcare within our sphere of influence here in North Carolina, but also potentially and aspirationally across the country. A bit about adapting the people strategy. So that's when we'll get a little bit into COVID and some of the other disrupting macro factors that have taken place within the last year and a half or 2 years. Then I'll start to get specifically into some of the areas where we've invested, areas of artificial intelligence a little bit, and also strategic workforce planning using different analytics tools. And then, assuming we have time at the end, I'm hoping to, in addition to answering any remaining questions, to give a demonstration of the predictive analytics tool that we're just beginning to kick off experimenting with at Blue Cross. So without further ado, who is Blue Cross North Carolina? So we are the market leader within the state of North Carolina for healthcare insurance. We have, as you see here, several million members, roughly 5,000 employees. We just went over 5,000 employees recently. $10 billion in revenue, although we are a nonprofit organization. And 3 out of every 4 North Carolina residents have Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. So we have a very high market share within the state of North Carolina, although increasing numbers of competition across all areas of healthcare insurance. No one will be surprised to see the message here about the affordability crisis, where everyone in this country is affected by the increasing cost of healthcare. That is not lost on us at Blue Cross, and has really been the main driving factor in forming the mission and strategies within Blue Cross to try to make healthcare more affordable for our members across the state. Therefore, transforming healthcare is, again, one of our biggest missions. So to get a little bit more specific into this, some of the specific issues that we've seen are a need to give doctors and clinicians more flexibility to deliver value, meaning in simple terms, to stop incenting doctors or healthcare providers from charging patients per transaction, per office visit, per test, all of those things that that at least most of us struggle with having to pay as patients within this country, and to be able to somehow change the business model to be more value-based. So to start to incent the preventative care, being proactively treating symptoms so that they don't end up, escalating into something that's more serious, more painful, and also more expensive. Again, we're not alone. We know among healthcare companies, many companies are going after this holy grail of trying to solve this problem, making care better, simpler, and more affordable. I'll go a little bit next into a little bit more specifics into our flagship program, which kicked. Yes.
Enrique here. One question, if I may.
Sure, please.
To what extent are these limitations statutory, right? The fact that payments need to be transactional versus value-based.
Yes, so our entire infrastructure is built around transactional costs and expenses. So it's very much of a transformational effort requiring partnerships between insurance companies and healthcare providers in order to change this business model. And there's been a lot of work to go through really changing and even incenting healthcare providers to do anything differently, because many healthcare providers make a lot of money with the current system. So there really is, it really does require getting everyone on the same page with the same sort of humanitarian values, I would say, and getting us all to want to fix a problem that isn't, frankly, much of a problem for the companies making a lot of money.
Yes, so I'm hopeful on this one because, for instance, in the state of Oregon, there has been inklings about remote consultations, right? And
yes,
those are actually, I guess, physicians are actually reimbursed, right? Or I guess patients are reimbursed for remote consultations.
Yes.
And that was very difficult before, so I don't know exactly what changed.
Yes, that's a good point. During COVID, we've also started to incent doctors, paying them more essentially to do remote visits or remote checkups as out of necessity because of the COVID pandemic. But that is something that's on the table for further negotiation as it becomes more of a mainstream practice to see your doctor remotely, whether we have a pandemic or not. Even after the pandemic is over, hopefully it'll be over after a vaccine is developed and maybe some other things happen to make us able to kind of go back to a more mobile, more on-site kind of existence. We want to be able to certainly keep remote visits as part of the patient experience, because it's, I don't know about all of you, but I know that when I'm sick enough to go see the doctor, the last thing I want to do is sit in a waiting room and wait for a turn, or wait for, or get in a car even to drive someplace to see a doctor. So those are some of the hurdles that we'll still have to learn how to get over when there's less of a universal impetus to work remotely or visit doctors remotely. But.
So is there regulation that prevents that transformation, or is just the way business has been done today?
It's just the way business has been done, at least from my experience within my own state. Doctors are able to, there's a matter of infrastructure, of the technology infrastructure, but which is, pretty simply addressed, as I think anyone here would recognize. Technology is universally accessible. We're using it right now, for example, right? You don't need a huge financial investment to be able to have a face-to-face visit. But that is a factor, in maybe some rural doctor's offices, for example, like North Carolina has 100 counties. Many of them are just above the poverty line, or sparsely populated, lower income earners in those counties, and fewer doctors to choose from. So there are some challenges related to those types of issues, which may require some sort of potentially, government subsidies to doctors' offices to get the equipment they need. But I think that's more the exception than the rule, and it's more just the way business has been done. I think that's driven it this way.
So I would say there's hope, right? Because it doesn't require an act of Congress, so it just requires institutional change. That's hard, but I guess not impossible.
I agree.
Yeah.
There's another comment or
Yeah,
question?
Nate, this is Sunil. Quick question for you. So if you look at the same visit, remote, meaning via telemedicine, versus in person, what's the reimbursement differential?
So I think it varies. My understanding is it varies from place to place and insurance company to insurance company. What Blue Cross has done during this time is given doctors an identical reimbursement formula, or you know, basically pay them the same amount that they would be paid for in-person visits. But that was part of what I was hinting at with, you know, more negotiation to be done in the future. Companies need to see, again, where's all the money landing as well. So there might have to be some renegotiation involved, but it would really be by insurance company, doctor by doctor basis, which is part of what we're getting at with the Blue Premier program that I'll talk about next. It starts to get at some of that, but there are a lot of these you know, hard nuts to crack that still need to be cracked, you know, to move forward together. So I think that what the COVID experience has been teaching us is, for one thing, healthcare can be delivered in an acceptable way, you know, a large number of times remotely or over telemedicine. So even some people doubted that was even possible. So I feel like we are accelerating our acceptance level to having a different kind of doctor visit experience. And I think the financial part of that is going to naturally have to be following and being renegotiated.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. So that's a good segue into Blue Premier, which is the name of the flagship value-based program that Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina has began to pilot back in late 2018, early 2019. So we have about, I think it's 8 healthcare providers now, all in the Raleigh area, greater Raleigh area, UNC Healthcare, Duke Hospital, Rex Hospital, some of the larger healthcare providers in our state in the more highly populated areas have agreed to try essentially this new program, which has two-sided risk, as it says here. So essentially it gets at that value-based proposition where we will, in a nutshell, we will incent doctors based on the value of the care that they provide, not by the number of the frequency or the number of treatments that go into that. And this has been a very challenging thing for us to do. We're in such an early stage that in our case, Blue Cross is taking all of the downside risk on doctors. And so that's been one way we've been able to incent the healthcare providers to enter into these agreements in the first place is I believe it's a 2 to 3 year early window where they don't face any downside risk financially whatsoever, but it's a chance for us to try out the model. And what it comes down to is essentially Blue Cross making a large investment in data and analytics to be able to measure the effect of what value looks like, what valuable healthcare looks like, and then putting together models that would then incent follow-up bonus payments back to healthcare providers. So if I go to the doctor for say I have open heart surgery, God forbid, I don't know, have something more of maybe a routine but still serious surgery, the ability of me to recover more quickly and require fewer follow-ups or any follow-up surgeries or appointments would then put more money back into the pocket of the healthcare provider that did the surgery, for example. The downside risk then after the 3-year period is over would be the opposite. So if I had that same procedure but had to continue going back for follow-ups and follow-ups and follow-ups, then the healthcare provider would have to reimburse the insurance company some amount as well. So that was a very high level explanation of a very complex business model, but are there any questions at this point about the basic idea there? No, okay. So as it says here, it's making primary care a priority. So it's making just quality of care a priority as well. So said even more simply, trying to do more of what works and less of what doesn't work. Part of also what we've done at Blue Cross is expanded the type of healthcare services that we reimburse for, including a broader array of mental health services and behavioral services in particular. And again, hoping for fewer visits to the emergency room and less costs and less fragmented care. Now, what we've really faced as one of the biggest challenges, and this gets to a bit of the technology investment, is this data analytics piece. It's much more difficult than I guess it's so difficult it helps to explain why this isn't already a widely accepted model in our country. Just getting the data clean and matched, like any kind of data and analytics analysis, requires quite a bit of work. And so we've made large investments in our data and analytics staff, data scientists, data analysts, programmers, to be able to build the infrastructure so that we can accurately even measure the data that we're getting in the first place. So during this 2 to 3 year ramp up period, so that we can give credible information back to the healthcare providers in order to then turn over to that two-sided risk equation. But that's been a huge investment by Blue Cross into that data and analytics function to be able to get that to work. So now I'll pivot from sort of the overall high-level strategic kind of view of Blue Cross and start to zero in a little bit on what we've all been experiencing and some of the things that have just happened to Blue Cross alone that have caused us to adapt the people strategy. So this is a chart from PwC around workforce strategy trends, and I put a box around the top 3 answers for which workforce strategy is the top priority for healthcare organizations. And you probably aren't surprised to see a lot has to do with upskilling, digital upskilling, digitization, increased technology, both in the offices and hiring employees with those types of skills to make technology happen. So I talked a bit about our investment into data and analytics. We created an entire department called data and analytics. So we're actually they're not part of IT, for example. They're their own standalone organization. And in addition to that, we've increased hiring of data and analytics skilled people and sprinkled them also in a decentralized manner throughout the company. In HR, where I work, we also have a separate people analytics function where we look specifically at mostly at employee analytics data, but in any case, that also was a department that didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago. I've been at Blue Cross, by the way, just over a year, so it predates my time at Blue Cross, but it was no more than 3 years ago that the people analytics function was created as well. So what are some of the disruptions that we've faced? So I listed there COVID, no surprise, we've all dealt with that, been dealing with that since 2020 started at least. And but that's the third bullet. In addition to that, we had some other disrupting factors take place just to our company. So we had our CEO, some of you may have read about this. We had a very charismatic and effective CEO last year who had some personal issues, shall we say, that caused him to resign, sadly. So he has moved on, and he moved on really at a terrible time, to be perfectly frank, from a strategic business point of view. But nonetheless, we had a CEO turnover happen back in 2019 and transitioned from again, a very popular and vision-driven and charismatic leader to our interim CEO, who is a fantastic leader, but didn't have the same level of charisma and different background, but more of a steady steady personality and a strong leader, but again, just an interim. and as a matter of fact, next week, where our new CEO, Dr. Tunde Sotunde, is going to join Blue Cross for the first time and be our new CEO. And he's a medical doctor, as was the previous CEO. So we're going to keep we think we'll keep a very similar focus and similar strategy, but nevertheless, quite a big disruption for the organization to process last year prior to COVID. In addition, along with that, so Cambia Health Solutions, which is out in the Pacific Northwest, we were meant to strike a strategic affiliation agreement with Cambia and Blue Cross North Carolina, which was going to be an attempt to consolidate financial resources and share strengths across the country, which is a big deal for Blue Cross North Carolina. Again, being a company that really only operates within our single state, it was quite a lot of work culturally and literally with the different leadership teams of the two companies getting together to begin to negotiate what a strategic affiliation agreement might look like in the future. So there's a lot of change management work that went into it in preparation for a strategic affiliation, which ended up being put on hold in the end as a result, most directly, of the same CEO transition. So that was another sort of big blow and distractor to the company. And then right on the heels of that was COVID. So we've really taken it on the chin, I would say, from a macro level the last year and a half. So all that being said, we had to respond to that. So I'll just give a few little tidbits as I get a little bit more drilled down into specifics around what our response was. We were very much a on-site culture. I put down 95% on-site. That's prior to COVID. Very much of an old school traditional, meetings take place in person, in conference rooms, face-to-face, very little maturity around video conferencing, almost no remote workers whatsoever, and almost all workers, again, citizens of the state of North Carolina. So this is someone who came from Cisco, almost 20 years at Cisco. Very different, from what a Cisco or some of the places you may work at are used to. However, with COVID, we really made a really great response and quickly turned to be, I put here 98%. It's a very, very high percentage of the company working completely remotely. And I'm happy to say have been operating really well all during that time. And we've already agreed at a senior leadership level that when this is all over, whatever that means, we are going to adopt and keep a lot of the work from home practices that we've picked up, because we think it's really been more effective and employees are more satisfied generally with the flexibility that we have now. So that was been sort of a silver lining to the COVID disruption for us. I'm going to pick up my pace a little bit as I check my watch. I see I'm going a little bit slowly here from the pace I was expecting. We've also made a big investment in fearless leadership training, which is an outside vendor we brought in it's called the Neuro Leadership Institute. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about that offline, but we've adopted their curriculum. And last year we happened to make a big investment in training leaders, which has really been paying off in a big way, given the different disruptions we've faced. And then finally, and more of an investment, in addition to what I mentioned with the data and analytics division within HR, which is where I'll drill down into next. I'll unpack a little bit of some of the HR investments we've made in AI and also in strategic workforce planning. At this point, any questions for me at that point? No? Okay. So this is just a sort of a generic depiction of the maturity pyramid that we're following at Blue Cross. We have another area of the company which focuses on digital process automation, churning out bots, optical character recognition software, and NLP as well. So this is not my division, but we are partnering very closely with the folks who do this day to day and looking for ways to implement AI within Blue Cross, ultimately with the hope of automating or augmenting the work that people do, which gets more into the job that I do personally and my team looks at. It's less on implementing the actual AI process improvements and more so in, once we've done that, what are the effects to people as a result of those investments. So this is a bit of an eye chart. I show it simply to try to paint the picture of the complexity that we're dealing with. The strategic workforce planning square there in the middle, second row in the middle, in the people row, the pink background, that's really my area of responsibility represented here on the chart. And I would say, as it says here, the work scenario of the work that's emerging, the different colors, if you could read the bottom left-hand legend, it talks about essentially the level of maturity or implementation of any of these particular boxes. So you can see there's a lot of emerging or future or growing. It's very little active on here. Again, keeping in mind we're a nonprofit healthcare company and not a high-tech company, but we're trying hard to embed a lot of that high-tech infrastructure within Blue Cross. And as a result, there's been a lot of good progress we've made in the digital transformation journey, but still a long way to go till we get to the finish line. But one of the ways that we are having some success is in people analytics. So what I'd like to do now, to pivot one more time, is to talk a little bit about the predictive analytics software as a service tool that we have a subscription to, I guess is the right term, with a vendor. So Fathom is the way you pronounce that first word. And I've mentioned them a little bit before. I'm going to show you now with some of their overview slides, and then if we have time, I'll show a quick demo of the tool. I know there's some interest in some of you in doing this type of work yourselves, and so I figure at the least it'll be interesting to see what other people are doing, and maybe at the best give some other ideas for things that you might want to build on your own, or see a bit of what you might be competing with. So Fathom is a startup based in Australia. Yes.
Nate,
sure.
this is Sunil. Before you go into the details of Fathom, can I ask a question on the previous slide?
Absolutely.
So if you go back for just a moment, this one. So help me, how should we think about the columns of OCR, ICR, and then NLP, right? How does Blue Cross of North Carolina think about those?
So for those, so for us, those represent more complex AI technology than we have been able to implement successfully. That's one way. We recognize some of the business processes that we do manually would benefit by OCR in particular. For example, we have folks whose job is to take handwritten notes from doctors or from doctors' offices and transcribe them digitally, into our system, where optical character recognition would be able to, replace the need for that manual transcription. It's pink because it's emerging. I might even say it should be gray in future in the context of Blue Cross Blue Shield, because it is so new for us. I think it's pink because we've made a small investment into OCR technology with the purpose of being embedded in that particular work stream, but it's a pretty small investment relative to the amount of impact it might have, and also given the recency of the investment. So it's I look at a lot of the investments in technology that we're making at Blue Cross, maybe with the exception of more basic like chatbots and things like that, as being quite experimental and a lot of learning as we go along to see where we can best implement these investments. And then NLP.
Okay, so this is largely process centric. This is improving processes, streamlining, automating, those types of things.
Yes,
sort of the
exactly.
Context. That's the
exactly.
right way to think about it?
It is.
Got it.
It
okay.
is.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Okay, so jumping back to Fathom and from again the use that I'm looking to get out of this type of data is really captured by especially the second and third parts here, the center and the right, but also it does cover the one on the bottom left there. So essentially, they offer three different perspectives. The first is on which emerging technologies or AI technologies in particular can create the most opportunity within a workforce to either automate or augment work, which again is very interesting to me, but I don't have direct responsibility for it, but I partner with those folks. In the middle, what roles in the workplace are most likely to be impacted? So again, is it giving the example of that I just talked about with OCR? If we have a dozen workers who have, making their living, feeding their families, transcribing handwritten notes, we would rather not just let them go. We want to find someplace else for them to go. But we first of all want to know that we could proactively look ahead and anticipate what the downstream effects of any of these investments in technology are likely to be given the specific demographics of our company and not just sort of in general. So that's really what the second one is talking about. And then the third one is again, reskilling. So trying to find a softer landing place for folks who may be displaced by technology in the future. So Fathom's perspectives allow us to have insights, data to help us make those decisions or give us insights into those three areas. Because I know this group is so technically savvy, I wanted to include something that was a little bit more technically worded. So, but I'll walk through this a little bit. So this talks about, it says our methodology. My name is blocking it over there. There we go. So this is the methodology at Fathom, and if we follow the numbers, that's the way I'll describe it. So first of all, at the top, so they have a software as a service platform. They list it as 160 million data records. Their data records are founded in ONET and government Census Bureau data, very generic labor data on what job roles exist in the world and what are the skills that are the attributes that would be used to describe any job. And they have 244 attributes, which I'll talk about in a second. That's essentially the platform that we have access to. Going back over to number one, so that they focus on the technology. So they have opinions and predictions based on data, looking at 17 different types of artificial intelligence technologies and what the adoption curve is for each one of those technologies. So based on data and then with their own algorithms, they give predictions on which technologies are being adopted now or more likely to be adopted in the future, and in which order and which rates, things like that. Number two on the right-hand side is those workforce attributes. So the 244 attributes I've talked about a couple times. They have, again, they say literally every job that exists is in their work data. So everything, for short order cook to brain surgeon to landscaper, everything is in there, and the attributes that go into each one of those roles. And then the combination of number three is where they add their secret sauce or their intellectual property using data analytics or data science, is to build the algorithms that then marry those data sets together. In layman's terms, they make a prediction, or they have an opinion on which human skills will be impacted the most or at what rates given certain technologies. And then they marry that with the skills that make up each job role. And so if I've got a job role that's got a high number of those skills that will be impacted by technology, then therefore my role is more likely to be impacted by technology. In simple terms, that's the way their algorithm works. The fourth box down at the bottom talks about the different demographic data, which we entered from Blue Cross to Fathom in order to sort of work as a cipher to allow us to interpret the data that they've got. So it is anonymized, there's no names in there, but we do list we did give them a flat file, CSV file, with job titles, salary, workplace being the geographical location, the organizational unit that they work in, the age and the gender, along with some other things as well, job descriptions, other things as well that help us to make those apples to apples matches between our data and their data. But those are the basic building blocks that they've taken from us from a demographic standpoint. Okay, this, I promise I won't stay on this one long because it's too hard to read, but this is in the attachment in the email that Yasi sent around if you want to look more closely at this. But I wanted to include it just to give a list of the 17 AI technologies that they look at. So it's everything from the dotted line over to the left are the 17. So everything from process automation, fixed robotics, and mobile robotics, all the way over to the reinforced AI column there with looks like 6 different AI technologies in it. So those are all plotted on their dashboard, and in hypothesis. So those are listed because they're more in the predictable future. Then they've got another 6 AI technologies over on the other side of the dotted line in the hypothesis stage. So self-awareness technologies and superseding technologies, emotive understanding, contextual reasoning, experience, sensation, etc. So those are not involved in the tool, but they're part of their planning and possibly future releases as those AI technologies become more mature. Okay, this will, I wanted to show this slide because it'll help me accelerate the demo a little bit. The small picture you're seeing there on the bottom right is a representation of their dashboard. So when we get to the dashboard, I'll skip over it a little bit more quickly because I'll explain it a bit here on this slide instead. They've got 6 different major views on the dashboard, which you can see they're listed 1 through 6. So you've got key insights from technology impact, org unit impact, people impacts, and then specific job impacts. So the green are more around technology focused, and then the gray are more around what types of impacts are those technologies likely to mean from a job perspective. So automation meaning work that'll be replaced. And so the way that Fathom reports the ROI on automation return is a reduction in costs, so in salary costs. For augmentation, they're talking about jobs that are not replaced but enhanced by technology, and they represent the ROI for augmentation from a capacity gain standpoint. And then finally, the 6th box, the addition impact, these are jobs that don't currently exist within Blue Cross, but they would suggest should exist or will exist in the future should we make the investments in different technologies. Okay, so this one might be, this is kind of a good overview, I think, of the different kind of scenarios that we can use the tool for. And I'll just, if we'd focus on the right-hand side, that might be the easiest way to go through it. So essentially there's a number of filters, which I'll show you during the demo, which are represented largely by the type on the right. So prediction year, we're able to have a filter that looks from 1 year out to 15 years out from a technology availability and adoption standpoint, again, predictions on the way those will look. Technology type gets a bit into, again, those 17 different AI technologies I talked about, and they'll have, you know, different impacts depending on which ones that we're talking about, and depending on the makeup of the roles and the skills that make up those roles in our given organization. Organization unit, so there's other deeper filters we can look at. So for example, in addition to the demographic categories I talked about on the previous slide, the things like gender and age, we also have ways to look into, to drill down into organizations. So I can look at all of HR, and I can look at, you know, the compensation team within HR, or I could look at the, you know, benefits team within HR as well. So that kind of a further drill down. And then finally, for Blue Cross Blue Shield, the location, geographical location data they have isn't generally very helpful for us because we're so located in one area. But that gets more it's more applicable to global companies or companies with more dispersed and distributed workforces. If let's just say there was a civil war in in a country where it didn't exist in another, they would reflect things like that, macroeconomic or other issues that are geographically based. They would reflect those types of predictions as well. Okay, so I believe this is my second to last slide before the demo. So we've looked at a number of use cases within Blue Cross. This is one that I actually touched on a bit earlier, although with a different example, so I won't spend a lot of time on this now that I think about it, but it gets a lot at that optical character recognition example I spoke about earlier. Essentially, the issue would be something like, there's something happening that's giving us an opportunity to automate or augment roles. It could be OCR on the folks, again, that transcribe handwritten notes into digital text. What are we going to, that's an issue that we need to deal with and leaders need to plan for. It's good to invest the money and get the ROI, but it's also good to be able to redeploy the people if possible. So we would be able to use Fathom to do some of that planning work, scenario planning work, down to that specific level or that specific area of the organization, looking at the specific roles and the specific skills and getting some ideas about where else the impacted folks might move to. And then finally, the impact hopefully could be lessened by the fact that we're able to retrain and redeploy folks into other roles. Okay, I'm gonna switch now to the demo. Doing a quick time check. I'm gonna try to give you a 10-minute at most demo here. Bear with me while I find the right, there it is, okay. Okay, great. So again, I hope you'll find this interesting. I'm not trying to sell subscriptions to Fathom or anything by any means, but I don't work for them. But I think you might find it interesting, as I haven't seen anyone else with this type of service offering personally. So if anyone has seen them, I would love to learn about that. But in the meantime, I'll show you a bit of what they offer. And right now we're looking at dummy data. So while Blue Cross's data is loaded in the tool, I'm not going to show that for the purposes of confidentiality. Instead, I'm showing this fictitious UK bank company as well, but it gets at some of the same features as well. So this is the dashboard I spoke about in the last slide. I'm going to skip over it since we just talked about that. And I'll just pick out some of the more interesting pieces of data that I think people find interesting. So here's the technology portfolio slide. This is essentially saying, before I go there, the filters I talked about on that iceberg slide, they're here on the top. So right now we're looking at a 5 years out, we're looking at all 17 technologies, 8 technology types or AI.
Hey, Nate?
Yes.
What we see right now is use case strategic workforce planning slide.
Oh, thank you for telling me that. I don't know why that's happening. Oh, resume share. Let's see if that fixed it. Do you see it now? A green. Sorry, no, it says your screen share is paused. I hit resume share.
Let me see if.
Oh, I might need to pick a different window. I'm sorry, but thank you for telling me that.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing, and I think I have to pick a new window probably. That wouldn't have been a very fun demo, would it? If you're looking at the slide.
And
Okay.
there is a question from Jim. So after the demo, he has.
Okay. Great, thanks. Thank you. I can't see the chat, so I appreciate that. Do you see the green background now?
Yes.
Okay, now this is the tool. So the filters are here along the top. And again, I won't belabor it, but again, there are many filters we can pick. Right now, all the filters are on. So we'd be looking at every possible piece of data within this bank. So this is saying, given the 5-year horizon, and based on potential technologies that this particular UK bank could invest in, given the specific makeup of the jobs that make up the bank, process automation is the #1 ROI opportunity for this bank to potentially make. And I want to say to him, be careful to emphasize, this is not you know, these numbers are directionally correct. Clearly, this has no actual investment data in it whatsoever. So there's a lot of assumptions that go into the recommendations that Fathom makes, specifically around investment in technology. It doesn't say invest $1 and you'll get $5 back. It doesn't say anything like that. It's really more around, if a leader has a given budget to invest in AI, and they've got many different choices of things to invest in, and they don't have technology savvy to rely on, it'll give them some ideas about where they might want to invest based on the general adoption of given technologies and maturity. And again, the specific makeup of the roles within that company, but it's not saying, if I invest, you know, in process automation in this bank, I can reduce my budget next year by 79.2 million pounds because I'll get all that money back. Yeah, that would be obviously a wrong way to interpret the data. But in any case, they give this sort of technology view, again, with the 17 AI technology choices chosen. I'll jump over to the people side where it gets into specific job impact. So wait for it to load. Okay, so I'll try to make this a little larger. Okay, so this is saying, of all the jobs in the bank, bank tellers are the most susceptible to, or the most exposed to, automation and augmentation. That seems right. That doesn't, you know, that makes sense. If you hover over the bar, then it gets into some more detail about how much of that impact or potential impact is through automation and how much through augmenting the roles. So there's a lot of rich data in here. I won't try to belabor it, but it goes in decreasing order of likely impact. So teller first, and then decreasing fewer and fewer down the list. There's lots of different ways you can, you know, slice and dice the data, but this is the default view. If you, actually, I'll go down this way. Oh, sorry. I will go to age impact. So if you've got a company with a dispersed, you know, a widely dispersed age generational view like this bank has, it also can help an HR department or leaders to identify proactively where we might have challenges to deal with in the future based on purely the likelihood that people will be retiring in short term. So there's a way to dig into some of this data. Again, the color, the greens, have to do with, again, where is the automation and augmentation potential, and then the gray is unaffected. So again, just another source of data, another perspective that leaders could add to all of the other factors they would already look at based on experience and historical trend in the industry and things like that. And then finally, I'll show you the job corridor, which gets at that, again, in HR, this is very interesting to me, both from trying to find a soft landing for folks that may be displaced that I talked about earlier. It's also useful for talent acquisition professionals who may be trying to recruit for a certain role that's hard to find. One thing I would say in my own personal career, you know, working at Cisco and then working at Blue Cross North Carolina, not surprisingly, there's a lot more people around the world that want to work for Cisco than want to work for Blue Cross North Carolina, just from name recognition, obviously success, and sort of the sexiness of certain employers versus others. So at Blue Cross, sometimes we struggle to find the best talent we can get who would rather, who will work at Blue Cross and not want to go down the street to Cisco or to Red Hat or to Google. So this can also be helpful where a talent acquisition person can type in a role. I'll just type in, let's say, data architect. And over on the right-hand side, it'll give the names of similarly skilled roles, either internally or out in the world. And so I'm trying to see, sometimes it's nice when there's something unexpected that shows up here in the right. These first ones, I don't necessarily see anything that's that exciting or fun, but in any case, that's another way this can be used. So anyway, in the interest of time, I will stop the demo. And Jim has a question. Or do you still have a question?
Yes. Well,
Yes?
I'll read it. Jim,
Okay.
interrupt me if. He says, is trusted AI a concern in building your models? If so, what tools are you using for that? And I know Jim is on, so.
That's a great question. And Jim, I'm going to admit to you, I don't know the answer, but it's a great question that I'll be happy to investigate. If we have time, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, that I could take back to Blue Cross on that. What do you think we should be particularly worried about?
Hey, Jim.
Or you could email me later. Sorry, I'm trying to share the correct screen again. That's okay. Well, it's a great question. I will take it back and I'll email a response.
Sure. Any other questions?
Hey, Yasi, this is Sunil. I have one. So first off, Nate, great job. Thank you for walking us through this. Very, very insightful. One quick question is, how does Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina think about the patient experience evolving?
Yes, so we think it's evolving to become to require fewer visits. So it really gets at some of the strategy. The patient experience needs to be more customized. So make it feel more of that maybe old school relationship, patient doctor intimacy kind of relationship that I think people in our generation only see in old movies. The town doctor kind of a situation, and less of a factory, hospital as factory kind of model that unfortunately so many of us see today. That can be made better with data. So electronic medical records, for example, doctors can certainly, while they still are going to see many patients, obviously, in a given year, being able to quickly come up to speed and be reminded of a patient's history, what they look like, even personal, whether their family or things that could create a more quick intimacy with a patient to provide a stronger relationship right off the bat. I think that's part of the building a better patient experience. Clearly, having fewer procedures is clearly in the patient's best interest as well, which gets at some of that value-based motivation that we're trying to provide. I think also expansion into traditionally alternative medicines, more of an integrated health perspective is becoming more mainstream and more accepted by insurance companies. So if I want to see, my acupuncturist or, have something else that's traditionally seen as, out of the sphere of traditionally acceptable medical treatments, but is increasingly acceptable as we learn more about, Eastern medicine, for example, or other types of non-prescription treatments for different illnesses and things like that. I think patients want to see much more flexibility and open-mindedness like that.
Yep, got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hey, Nate, thank you so much. This was a great presentation. I have a quick question.
Yes.
In looking at Fathom, did you also look at Burning Glass, and how do you compare them?
I have not even heard of them, actually.
Okay.
So what's the name of them? What's the name?
Burning Glass. I'll send
Bur-
you the
Okay.
URL.
Thank you. I'd love to learn
I
about
don't even know if they're AI based. They do a lot of research on workforce development.
that. Okay. I appreciate the tip, and I'll be happy to look them up.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Nate. And
You're very
I'll
welcome.
be in touch with you on developing this point of view paper, like one of the
Okay.
pages. This was a great presentation.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for listening and for asking such good questions.
Thanks.
Okay. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. Hey, Nate. Oops.